Good day, everybody. Today we've got Kathie Barker. Now, Kathie is from a really interesting company called Release My Super. And she's going to tell us how all of this works in relation to releasing of your super, income protection, TPD, and then death. Now, but Kathie, what we like to do firstly on this podcast is to find out who you are, not what you do.
Who I am. All right, so I suppose once you get to my age, so I'm 63 years of age, you've had a few
Journeys?
professions, that you leave behind you. So I'm a mum, I'm a grandmother, I'm someone who's, along the journey had their own mental health issues, which is probably why I'm so passionate in terms of looking after people who can't necessarily advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
So, like this particular niche that Rob, my partner and husband, have sort of found really sort of suits both of us because, it's mental health. It's working predominantly with people who are trying to access superannuation through compassionate release of super program. In terms of, where we sort of come from in the way we like to look after people. I mean, Rob's always been a super advocate in working with places like Rotary and all those sort of things. I'm probably more sort of behind the scenes in terms of, looking after people who really just need some help. Whether that be financial help, because we will quite often dip into our own pockets, just to sort of go that extra mile with people. That's who we are as people.
Okay, so you give us. So besides work, what do you like to do? What do you and Rob like to do? I think you like to do cooking classes. What else?
All right, so it depends on which stage of, like right now we're really, really flat out, with the business. So the business takes up, a lot of our time. We're currently building a house together.
Oh my gosh.
For both Rob and myself, it's a second relationship. So we're sort of building this part of our relationship together. So, we're, I think, 18 months into a build. We went through all the dramas with Porter Davis, and all
Oh, Lordy.
Yeah,
sorry.
With that, then Rob was diagnosed with cancer. So we had quite a journey last year and trying to keep businesses afloat. But like everybody, you know what I mean? It's just part of life.
It is.
It's just part of life. So in my spare time, like when I was a mum of young children and whatnot, I used to do a lot of, sewing. I studied languages, right? So I studied Chinese. I lived in China for 4 years. I went to uni over there and studied Chinese. So I still like to keep my hand in with that. What else do I like doing? We have an ice bath twice a week. We try and do something together that sort of pulls us together as a couple as well, because like when you've got busy lives, it's easy to sort of all of a sudden look at each other and think, oh, hang on, who are you?
Yeah, exactly. I know. My husband and I always had a Friday night date night. Every Friday we would go out, even if it was just, for cheap Chinese, whatever. So we could look across the table from each other and say, oh,
yeah, well, over the summer period, Rob and I was we've got a four-wheel drive, so we just throw the mattress in the back of the four-wheel drive and we would take off down the beach and sleep in the back of the car with the two dogs, overnight.
Yeah.
Just to sort of get that time where we can't sort of escape from each other and talk.
You have to talk to each other.
Yeah, and catch up with each other.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's get on to your amazing business. So many people do know, but many people don't know that once we've been diagnosed with a terminal illness, there are actually avenues for us to access our super.
Yep.
For us to access income protection that we have maybe linked to our super.
Yeah. So look, everybody's journey is different, right? And as I was saying to you before, the podcast, before we started the podcast, I've got two sisters that have both got MS, right? Yep. So, like whilst, they were diagnosed with MS 20 years ago, it totally changed, the way that they live their lives. The youngest one, she was a school teacher. Her journey was she could no longer project her voice, right? She couldn't work full time anymore. She needed to be able to access her superannuation, which is what she did, right? Now, she did that through a solicitor's firm. And we do have relationships set up with solicitors as well. So it depends on the complexity of what we're doing as to whether or not we keep it in-house with us and we do it internally, or if we put it out to a solicitor, right? So, that depends on a number of things. We try and do as many as we can internally, because obviously the price difference between what a solicitor charges and what we charge is quite significant. But, like, a lot of people don't actually realise that as part of their superannuation, normal superannuation, they may have income protection, they may have TPD, and they may have death insurance attached to it.
So talk us,
So basically, they, you know what I mean, like your super gets paid in, right? And, if you've already got a policy set up, and quite often it'll be set up, through the super fund and the employer, you may not even be aware of it. And they're the people that sort of come through. And if they're not aware of it, it's, like it's something that, they're missing out on, because they're actually paying for the service. They're paying for that insurance component.
So this is, so if you're still employed or if you're still on contract with someone, you need to get a copy of your super.
So there's different
or what
ways.
the company provides you?
Yeah, so basically all you have to do is make a phone call to your superannuation fund, right? And just ascertain whether or not, you've got any insurances, right? So, you come to us and you sort of say, well, I say to you, well, do you have any insurances? And you say, well, I've got no idea, right? So the first point of contact is with your super, right? And you ask the question, do I have any insurances? Or you go into your app, right, and you have a look online and you say, well, okay, yeah, I didn't realise I've got income protection, or I've got TPD, or I've got death insurance.
Just tell us what TPD is.
All right, so temporary and permanent disability, right? So we did a client just recently who had massive pain through his hands, and, he is an electrician, or was an electrician, and then he moved into the teaching area, right? And he got to a point he couldn't even write on the whiteboard, right? So we did an income protection claim for him. So that would cover him for 2 years, and it works out to be a percentage of, your wage, right? And there's a few things that you've got to be aware of when we're doing, an income protection. Everything has to be supported by your GP and your specialist. So it's not like you can sort of just go in there and say, well, this is what I want to do. It's all got to be supported, through medical reports. So we did the TPD claim, and then sort of further down the track, it was obvious that he was not going to be in a position to go back to work. His health was deteriorating. So then we took on and put in a claim for TPD, right? That was then, picked up and supported, and he ended up getting a payout not only on the amount of money that he was holding on his superannuation, but also the insurance component. So there's two elements, right? If you're not able to work and you've got, say, $100,000 sitting in your superannuation with no insurances, you can still do a claim as long as it's supported by your medical team to access that, that money, right? But if you've got insurances, then obviously, there's that component as well.
Okay. I mean, I just know that there's going to be a lot of people who don't understand this, and that could be a massive relief for them too.
Yeah, well, look, we had a client literally within the last 6 months who came to us. He wanted to do a compassionate release of super for his wife, who woke up one day and she had all these mystery things going on. So we ended up doing a compassionate release. Now, compassionate release is different to your superannuation insurances. Compassionate release is administered by the Australian Taxation Office. And what we can do with a compassionate release, there's different categories, but under mental health, which is where we work, we can get money out of our super to go and tap into mental health programs, et cetera, et cetera. So we took money out of his super to get her some help. But by the time it had even gone through with the superannuation, or, with the ATO and with the superannuation fund, her health had deteriorated to the point that she was actually hospitalised. And it turned out that she had motor neurons. So she came to us in November, right? And we did an income protection for her, and she passed away probably about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks. Right. So, we sort of were able to, with hers, be able to get the income protection sorted out.
Yep.
By the time she'd passed away, we still hadn't got because what you can do is, if your doctor will support you, right, and it's a horrible thing to sort of talk about, but the reality is that if you know what's going to happen, right, you've got time to make provisions.
Correct. Well, we're all very pragmatic here. Once you get a diagnosis of MND, the final outcome. So
it's also in the time frame. So in other words, if your doctor supports you and says to you, your lifespan, right, is within the next 2 years, you are going to pass away, we can then access your death benefits as well.
Oh, okay.
So you can get that money out before you pass away, right? Which means, and you can get it out if you're doing it under that provision, you don't have to pay tax on it. Right? So say, for instance, you've got TPD insurance, right, and you've got death, or you've just got TPD and you've got death insurance.
Yep.
Right, we could put a claim in if the doctor supports it and says, well, your lifespan is not going to be past the next 2 years, and we get that money out. Normally you would pay tax on the TPD component, but if we do it under death, under those provisions, you're not paying any tax on it either, right? Which can help out enormously.
Yeah, it can help really a lot. There's nothing you can do for people who don't have super.
No, there has to be a pool of money to be able to tap into.
Yep.
If, however, you're married, right? So like in this gentleman's situation, whose wife passed away, we originally, as I said, we didn't realise that she had motor neurons.
Yeah.
So hers was all around. We actually thought she had some other mystery sort of mental health, neurological sort of problem, right? So we were trying to tap into things like support with psychologists and with this and that, and also with physio, and there are a whole heap of different services we were trying to tap into that were not covered under the public health system, right? So that's why we went through his super to take money out under the compassionate release of super program.
All right, that's really important to hear, I think.
So there's different ways, and it's horses for courses.
Yeah.
Right? And as I said, you've got to have the support of your medical team.
Yeah.
If your medical team, because we're all on different tracks, we've got, whether it's MS or, motor neurons or cancer or whatever it is, there's some people will run with it and be like that for a number of years.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's others that, aren't that fortunate.
Yeah.
And decline rather quickly.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, yeah, we do need the support of medical profession, but the good ones will support you, and it's your money anyway. Does VAD affect any claims or not? Death benefits?
Sorry,
voluntary assisted dying, that doesn't have any impact on claims? No.
You can sort of outside my breadth of experience. Like, we only work in the area around how it's insured. Yeah.
No, that's fine.
It also depends on, like, not all superannuation, claims are the same. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It depends on how it's written up, who the underwriter is and all those sort of things as well. So as you sort of get into it deeper, there's sort of some other things that you might uncover along the way, like as I said, for the guy that had, the problem with his hands, because we had it signed off by a specialist and also the GP, that then negated the tax that he had to pay on that money, right? So, yeah, and that was peculiar to his particular claim.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know that we had self-funded. We were self-funded. Sorry, we had our, what do you call it? What?
Self-managed super.
Yeah, that one, self-managed super. And we chose not to have income protection on that. So other people might do that too. So as Kathie said, the number one step is to find out whether you have income protection. Insurances on your super, income protection. That's number one thing to do.
Yeah, so there's two components,
Okay.
right? So you've got the insurance side of it, but you've also got the super. You might have $1 million sitting in super with no insurances.
Yeah.
You can still access that
Super.
money,
Yep.
right? For as long as you can prove that you cannot go back to work, right? Yep. And it really depends on how it's written. For some insurers, it might be you can't go back to work and work within the capacity that you're normally, working under, or it might be that you can't go back to work in any capacity, right? So it depends on the way the insurance is written up as well.
Yep.
Like we have had occasions where it's been with, someone who, who's had an injury at work or something like that. So it's not necessarily a terminal illness or anything, but they can't go back to work. Like we were working with a chef who had a fall in the kitchen. So the way that his insurance was written up, every year for 5 years, right, we have to put in a new claim to prove that he's still unable to go back to work, which seems ridiculous because he's not going to grow out, right? The reality is, but that's the way his insurance was written up. So every 12 months, we go through the whole process again of getting the paperwork from the specialists and the GPs and all the other paperwork we've got to submit each 12 months for him to get that next stage of the entitlement drawn down.
Yeah, sounds like the NDIS rigmarole.
Yeah, well, that's the only one I've ever come across like that. Most of them, most of them are, and to be quite honest, when you're working through an insurance company, right, you're initially working with the superannuation fund and they check all the initial paperwork. And then if they believe that everything's in order, then they pass it off to the insurer, right? And you get your own case manager.
Okay. And
the ones that I've worked with, they're normally really super helpful.
Great.
Right. So that's something else that you need to consider as well. Now, look, I'm not advocating and I'm not promoting that people should go off and do, their own paperwork or anything like that. But I think sometimes people get scared, right? And it's not as hard as what they think it's going to be, right?
But then, I understand that. But also when you're in the situation where you've been diagnosed with MND, life is extremely overwhelming. So if you can outsource something like this, it will make a massive difference.
And it does. But what I am saying is that, I know when my sister went through and did hers, it was before we were doing what we do. And as I said to you, we do have a relationship set up with a solicitor, right? So that we can sort of throw the ones that are, going to be really, really complicated across to them. But, sometimes you sort of, as long as you've got the paperwork filled out, it's almost like if you've got someone in your corner that can sort of advocate with you to sort of, okay, these forms need to be filled out. They've got to go up to the doctors, right? They've got to be filled out. You might be paying a solicitor $25,000, right, to do that. I know they're not cheap.
Yeah.
Right. So what I'm saying to you, I'm not saying don't do it. What I'm saying to you is that you do get a lot of support from the case manager, right, through the superannuation fund and also through the, through the insurer. Right now, the ones that become really complicated and more problematic are where there's a break, maybe in the insurance and usually around mental health, because mental health, if someone breaks their arm, right? Okay, they broke their arm in the state, they went to see the doctor, okay, they can't work. But mental health normally creeps up on people, right? Or even a diagnosis. I mean, with a lot of people, it takes a while to get a true diagnosis of what they've actually got.
Correct.
Right. So they might find that, you know, they finished work, right, on the 1st of January because their health was declining.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden, 12 months later, right, they still haven't been able to go to work. Then they're sent a letter, right, 18 months later or whatever, from the superannuation company saying, if you do not elect to stay in your insurance, we're going to opt you out. But they miss that because life is really complicated for them.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden they've got no insurance.
Yep.
And guess what? They've got a diagnosis then of whatever it is.
Yep.
Right. And we've got to then prove, did they have, at the
Oh,
time of
God.
that insurance, did they have that diagnosis? That's when they become quite complicated.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that I try and steer away from.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think that someone with the qualifications of a lawyer, right, are better to
do
serve
that.
people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, gosh. Everything's so complicated, Kathie. You can help a lot with all of this, though. Yeah.
It can be. Look, before I did my first one, I'd never done one.
Mm.
Right. You know, and, you know, like I'm a student and I'm good at paperwork and all those sort of things. But what I'm saying is you don't have to be a brain
surgeon. Okay. Yeah, we have a lot. We have enough
be
to
able
do
to-
with them throughout this process.
I think a lot of people like to complicate things because it protects
Their
industry.
business. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So just as well as being able to release super for the MND that we've been talking about, or other neurological issues, it can be, you can also, if anyone has family members that need assistance, it can be used for going to drug rehab. Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about two different things here.
Okay.
Right. So the first one is through, basically someone who can't work anymore. So
Okay.
what we've just covered is around the insurance.
Yep.
Right. And taking out that lump sum of super. But there's another program, right, which is called the compassionate release of super. Right. And that's our core business.
Okay.
Right. So basically we work with people with mental health, with drug and alcohol addictions, IVF,
Yep.
right, gender dysphoria, anything that comes under the label where we need to have a psychiatric assessment, right, we work in that area.
Okay.
Right, so someone comes to us and predominantly, our field covers drugs and alcohol.
Yep.
And, it's very much a mistruth if people think that the client or our client is someone who sits on the street corner with a bottle in a brown bag, right? It's the mums, the teachers, the nurses, right?
High functioning
people that have issues, right?
Yep.
There seems to be a lot of ADHD. That seems to be around a lot more than what it was in the past, and also autism and all those sort of things that we really didn't hear a lot about in generations gone by. So someone who's got undiagnosed ADHD, quite often they will then turn to meth and those sort of things because it has a very similar effect on the brain and the way that they can cope, right? So, quite often, trauma, all those sort of things lead to mental health, and then the coping mechanism is normally the alcohol, the drugs, whatever it is, sex, food, whatever it is, that they're reaching out for in order to cope. And it is, the school teacher, the mum, the nurse, the mechanic, everyday people, right? Your next door neighbours, right? It's not someone who's out of control, like it's the people that we go to church with.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So that's just as an aside for anybody who might be able to use that service. Sorry.
Yes. So in terms of how we can do that, we can take money from our own super, right? Once again, it's got to be supported by, in our case, because we're working in mental health, it has to be supported by the GP and also by the psychiatrist. So they've got to have two independent reports. If they're going into a drug and alcohol clinic, they've got to do their assessments with the clinic to make sure that they're a good fit for each other. And then the paperwork goes into the Australian Taxation Office. And then whilst all that's happening, we do the paperwork for the superannuation fund, right? So if someone comes to me today, right, I can have them in front of a psychiatrist within 24 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, we've got 8 psychiatrists or 7 or 8 psychiatrists who work with us. We've got a couple of GPs who also work with us. It's not claimable through Medicare, right, because it's a superannuation claim.
Yep.
We can take money out of the person that's involved, or we can take money out of their respective partner's super, or we can take money out of someone else's super, as long as we can prove the financial dependency on that person.
Okay.
Right. And that involves, you know, like there's different levels that we have to sort of get to. Right. So in other words, if someone comes to me and says, okay, I want to take money out of my super for my son to get into rehab, the first question I ask them is, do you live together? If they don't, I try not to touch them, because the proof, the level of
is too
proof
difficult. Yeah.
is too difficult. And I don't want to waste your money. It's expensive to go through the process, right? So I don't want to waste anybody's money, right? But if you live together and we can prove that there's a financial link in terms of you making transfers to their bank account, we need 6 months worth of proof through bank statements. We need to be able to prove that you are financially supporting that person, and without your help, that person would not be able to live.
Okay. All right. Kathie, you've been so interesting today. Thank you. So much information that, yeah, I knew a little of. Now I know a hell of a lot more.
Yeah, I think it's amazing because, you know, like most of our work comes through probably 3 sources. One is through the website itself, where people are aware that you can take money out of super, and they will then do a Google search, you know, on releasing money under compassionate grounds.
Yeah.
Most of our work comes through from referrals from the clinics.
Yep.
Right? So you will go to a clinic and inquire, you know, about their program, and then you're horrified when you hear how much it's going to cost.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you know, most people don't have, you know, that sort of funding, you know, sort of sitting there waiting for a rainy day.
Yeah.
Because if we're looking at it, like the cheapest clinic that we work with.
This is a clinic she's talking about, not MND, but.
Yeah, I'm talking about drug and alcohol.
Drug and alcohol. Yep.
Yeah, the cheapest clinic that we work with in Australia, right, comes in at about, I think, about 12,000 per month, right? Yeah. And then it goes up to 140 you know, per month, depending on the level of services.
Support, yeah.
Yeah, and support. We work with clinics over in Thailand, also over in Indonesia. And we have worked with different clinics at different times over in places like India, you know, so especially with IVF, because I mean, IVF is another big area.
Yeah,
that we
big expense.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kathie, so much. See, it wasn't that scary, was it?
Once I get talking, I'm fine.
Rob, do you have anything to say?
Rob's in the other room.
Oh, he did leave. When I said Rob's going to have to leave, he actually left.
Otherwise, his phone would have been going quiet and all that sort of stuff as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. So it's release my super, but I'm going to put all of the details on the podcast. So if anybody would like to get in touch with you for some advice, they can absolutely do that, can't they?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. But as I said, you know, like for us, it's all about making things achievable. And this part, we sort of finish the podcast now, because I don't want.
Still talking.
Okay.
I
was going to say, like, if we do an income protection one, right? You know, if you might have a nurse who's got income protection that works out to be, you know, $250 a week, right? So it's neither here nor there, and there's still quite a lot of paperwork involved in getting it through, right? So how do you charge that out? You know, so if you've